Our next panelist will be presenting. She's Julia Gaffield. She is a PhD candidate at in the Department of History at Duke University. Prior to attending Duke, she completed her undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto, Canada, with a major in history and Caribbean study as a master in history at York University in Canada. Julia is at Duke as a Canada-U.S. Fulbright Scholar and a doctoral fellow of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. Her dissertation examines the early independence period in Haiti and seeks to understand the diverse relationships that state leaders in Haiti held with the international community. This research builds on her previous work on state formation and nationalism in Haiti, now published in the Journal of Social History in 2007 as under the title, Complexities of Imagining Haiti, a Study of National Constitutions from 1801 to 1807. Recently, Mrs. Gaffield has made headlines. She has located a government-issued copy of the Haitian Declaration of Independence, which I think she'll be speaking about today, right?
Kind of, not quite. It's the context and the research project in which I found it. So.
All right. So her article is titled "Trade." The paper she'll be presenting is titled "Trade, War, and Sovereignty: Diplomacy and Migration in Independent Haiti from 1803 to 1806." Let's welcome Ms. Julia Gaffield.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies for organizing this conference, and to Lenny, Stephanie, and Graham for organizing it. By the summer of 1803, it was clear that the coalition of former slaves and free people of color in Saint-Domingue were on the verge of defeating Napoleon's troops. That spring, they had made their intentions clear by tearing the white out of the French tricolor and sewing the blue and red back together again. Their military successes allowed them to realize this symbolic reconfiguration. However, their next challenge would be to establish new trade and diplomatic links with the international Atlantic world. Thinking about the future, the leader of insurgent forces, General Jean-Jacques Dessalines, wrote to the Governor General of Jamaica, George Nugent, to propose a trade relationship. His rhetorical strategy was first to declare that his people could never again live under the, quote, humiliating and harsh yoke of French colonialism. Based on my consistent principles and the aversion I hold to the French name, Dessalines wrote on June 23, 1803, the people calls me to lead them toward the goal that it proposed, the expulsion of the tyrants. Dessalines condemned the actions of the French and accused them of, quote, treading on the laws of man and humanity, and of breaking the seal of reconciliation. He noted that the revolt was necessary and instigated by France's cruel oppression. And while the people were weary with humiliation, he confirmed that, quote, all the links that connect Saint-Domingue to France are broken. Furthermore, Dessalines was sure to note that, given the forthcoming separation between Saint-Domingue and France, quote, our ports will from now on be open to all of His Majesty's ships who will find the security of commerce and good faith treaties. Nugent did not immediately respond to Dessalines' friendly commercial invitation. Instead, he waited patiently as reports of diseased and starving French troops flooded in from Saint-Domingue. And despite the, quote, friendship and cordiality which happily prevails between France and England, Nugent did not feel obliged to respond to General Donatien Rochambeau's calls for aid. In 1802, Rochambeau, leader of the French army in Saint-Domingue, had published several proclamations inviting foreign nations to trade in diverse goods for consumption in the ports of Le Cap, Port Républicain, and Santo Domingo. The British in Jamaica received notice of Rochambeau's calls for aid, and they also received reports from British citizens arriving from the island. These reports allowed Nugent to understand the desperation of Rochambeau's pleas for help. They consistently noted the need for reinforcements from France, but which failed to arrive in sufficient numbers. Nugent understood that the French were in desperate need of British assistance, but he did nothing. Since economic incentives did nothing, Rochambeau tried to convince the British to come to his aid with fear-mongering. I think it necessary to reprimand the rebellion in Saint-Domingue so that our neighbors don't feel the same distress, Rochambeau wrote to General J. Thomas Duckworth, the chief naval officer in Jamaica. We are pleading the case of all of the planters of the New World. According to Rochambeau, the British might one day feel the misery of the French if they did not help to quash the revolution. But Nugent's actions suggest that he did not imagine a unified white community or an allied European colonial tradition. He saw opportunity in the evacuation of the French and further benefits in security and economic strategy in an agreement with Dessalines. The British found themselves in a position of considerable power, and they were forced to choose between the French and the coalition of former slaves and free people of color. However, Nugent could not yet openly antagonize the French, and he put on a front of good humor to Rochambeau. But in correspondence to London, it was clear that France's floundering efforts in Saint-Domingue were perceived to be to their benefit. Nothing, in my humble opinion, Nugent wrote to John Sullivan, the Undersecretary for War in the Colonies, can be more advantageous to the British government than the continuance of civil war in Saint-Domingo. It will be a constant drain from the mother country while contested, and when abandoned, I do not think we have much to fear from the neighborhood. Rochambeau warned of the spread of this revolution, but Nugent did not see the British situation as comparable to or allied with that of the French. He speculated on the potential dangers to Jamaica, but concluded that, quote, the minds of the Negroes here are by no means prepared to receive the infection, and then in brackets, and they detest the French Negroes in particular, as the white inhabitants are not divided in sentiment, as they were in French Saint-Domingo previous to the revolution there. Nugent's analysis suggests the importance of political divisions between Royalists and Republicans during the French and Haitian Revolutions, and the opportunities that these conflicts may have provided for insurgent slaves and free people of color. According to Nugent, if the white colonial population could appear unified, their island would be saved from a slave uprising. Furthermore, he notes a nationalist division in the slave labor force. Slaves owned in British islands would not act in the same way as those owned by French citizens. Nugent calculated that French losses would, if they were careful, provide favorable opportunities for the British because of the shift in the economic balance. God grant that the French may continue in their present error, Nugent wrote to Lord Robert Hobart, Secretary of State for War in the Colonies, and that they may waste their strength and resources in prosecuting so ruinous an enterprise as the restoration of the advantages formerly derived from the possession of Saint-Domingo. As long as we use proper precautions in Jamaica, we have, in my humble opinion, but little to fear from that quarter. But it requires great vigilance to prevent the interested inhabitants from introducing improper subjects into this island. The French emigrants at Kingston are constantly importing their slaves from Saint-Domingo, who are of the worst description. And here's the first moment of international migration in the context of British-Haitian negotiations. French slave owners fled to locations throughout the Caribbean and North America, and many of them ended up in Jamaica. There they occupied a complicated role in society, fellow planters and slave owners in distress, but members of an enemy nation, or soon-to-be enemy nation and former enemy nation. Furthermore, they brought with them slaves who had been corrupted by ideas of freedom and equality, an infection that the British hoped would not spread to their own citizens and slaves. I have lately been obliged, Nugent wrote to Hobart on March 4, 1803, to take up all those slaves I could find and put them on board a prison ship in the harbor in order to transport them when opportunity might offer. The British in Jamaica did not approve of this wave of migration from Saint-Domingue, They hoped to keep their own slave population isolated from the former slaves and slaves of Saint-Domingue. And what is interesting, and has come to my attention based on a recent conversation with Rebecca Scott, who's here at Michigan, is that the so-called slaves being imported from Saint-Domingue, according to Nugent, had in fact been freed in 1793 and 94. So there's a certain denial of freedom in the imaginary, in the international imaginary, and I think Graham's paper also speaks to this issue. In early 1803, Nugent suspected the possibility of a renewal of the war with France and notified His Majesty's ministers in London that he would take the necessary measures to devise a plan for a British commercial relationship with Saint-Domingue. I have still tolerable good information from Saint-Domingo, he wrote, and should the evacuation of the French take place, I will lose no time in communicating to Lord Hobart my sentiments on the intercourse which it may be absolutely necessary to renew with the ruling power in that island for the security of Jamaica. The security of Jamaica could only be assured through a friendly relationship with Saint-Domingue. However, it's interesting to note that Nugent did not pursue the same strategy when the western part of the island was still owned by the French. An agreement with the rebel forces in Saint-Domingue could preserve the security of Jamaica in a way that an alliance with the French could not. Maybe Nugent recognized that the French could not ultimately control the rebel population. The temporary peace between the French and the British dissolved, and news of the renewal of the war arrived in Jamaica in August of 1803. Outright war with the French encouraged the British to capitalize on the economic opportunities now available to them in Saint-Domingue. I have the honor to inform your lordship, Nugent wrote to Hobart, that in consequence of the renewal of the war, the principal part of the French force in Saint-Domingo is blockaded in Cape Francois by the squadron upon this station, and that the enemy can receive no supplies. He counseled that, quote, until the French evacuate the island, it may not be politic to treat with them openly, and lamented that they could not effectively blockade all Saint-Dominguean ports, allowing the French some respite through trade with American merchants. And indeed, American merchants capitalized on any opportunity for trade in Saint-Domingue and would continue to do so even after Dessalines officially declared independence, much to the chagrin of the British. Dessalines, impatient to trade with the British, sent a duplicate of his June 23, 1803 letter to Nugent on August 2nd. I have taken the earliest opportunity, Nugent finally responded to Dessalines on August 18th, of sending 2 persons to Gonaïves to treat with your Excellency relative to a commercial intercourse between Jamaica and Saint-Domingue, and we hope the result will prove advantageous to both parties. Nugent declared himself, quote, happy to attend to Dessalines' wishes and to improve the good understanding which ought always to subsist between the 2 islands. Nugent had made his decision. The British would side with the coalition of former slaves and free people of color against the French. While France's defeat in Saint-Domingue opened the door for a commercial relationship between the British Empire and the former French colony, the evacuation of French troops from Saint-Domingue proved problematic for the British. The British ships blockading the Saint-Dominguean ports captured the French troops as they set sail in defeat. These French troops, now prisoners of war, were brought to Jamaica. We have about 7,000 prisoners of war in Jamaica, Nugent reported to Hobart on December 10, 1803, including 1,500 who are on shore, nearly 1,000 of whom are officers upon their parole. The British were clearly not comfortable with French citizens and their slaves wandering about in one of their major cities. Days after Dessalines declared Haiti's independence, although he could not yet have known this information, Nugent sent a British agent, Edward Corbett, to treat with Dessalines. His Majesty's ministers in London suggested a renewal of the accord between Dessalines' predecessor, Toussaint Louverture, and General Thomas Maitland, the Brigadier General, for British forces in Saint-Domingue during the Revolution. Most importantly for the British, this treaty would limit the size of ships involved in the coastal trade in Haiti to 50 tons and less than 10 persons in crew. Furthermore, these vessels would not be allowed to navigate further than 5 leagues from Haiti's shores. The British recognized that merchant mobility might result in the spread of the rebellion from Saint-Domingue. If they could prevent the rebels from having contact with enslaved people in the British West Indies, they reassured themselves that their colonies would remain secure. However, Dessalines would not hear of these restrictions. He had already promised the British that he would not interfere in their internal affairs, and this should have been enough. The intention of my government, Dessalines wrote, is solely to defend itself from the French government and their allies, to fight against oppression and to attempt nothing against the powers who are charitable enough to see the French government as treacherous, regicidal, and tyrannous. Nugent also asked that these coastal ships carry British passports to prove their compliance with the trade agreement. Being an independent nation, Dessalines responded that it would be his government that would issue these permits and certificates, not a foreign government. In international commerce, Dessalines wished that Haitian merchants be identified as such. National identity and state status could be negotiated and asserted on the Caribbean seas. The trade proposal included a number of other articles, 14 in all, and Dessalines added 2 of his own. First, that British agents who would be stationed in Haiti would be sure to provide arms and ammunition, as well as black laborers, for the renewal of Haitian agriculture. And second, that all Haitians on British ships or in British prisons be returned to Haiti. And this made 16 articles in total. The revolution had severely depleted the Haitian population, and Dessalines was hoping to rebuild his labor force. Dessalines noted to Corbett, quote, "The restoration of the country demands them, and I am persuaded that British commercial interests require it. Haitians would have nothing to trade with the British if they did not have a labor force that could produce agricultural goods." The trade agreement proposed by the British would allow them, according to Dessalines, an unacceptable amount of control over Haiti's international commerce, and so he refused to concede to the unequal trade relationship. As a result, the British withheld their diplomatic recognition of the independence of Haiti, a point that irked Dessalines greatly. "Our refusing to acknowledge the independence of Haiti," Corbett reported to Nugent on February 29, 1804, "by declining to treat with him as Governor-General thereof, but merely as General-in-Chief of the Army Indigène of St. Domingo, experienced his strongest objection, and he expressed himself in terms to a rejection of those parts of our proposals altogether. Until the British addressed him properly, using the title given to him by his generals on the first day of independence, then Dessalines would not even consider the articles that they proposed, never mind that the articles themselves were unacceptable." There are a couple of other interesting side negotiations involved in these conversations, one regarding the island of Mont-Saint-Nicolas, and the other regarding the Swiss, Poles, and Germans that the French had integrated into their army and who came to Saint-Domingue at the end of the Revolution. Some of these individuals had been taken as prisoners of war upon the evacuation of Rochambeau's troops and had then been integrated into the British Army. "I have been fortunate in recruiting nearly 400 Germans, Swiss, and Poles from the prison ships," Nugent reported to Hobart, "and everything depending upon me will be done to render this island secure against any hostile attempts." 3 months later, Nugent noted that the number had increased to 565. However, Nugent hoped to further increase this number, mainly because he was not receiving sufficient reinforcements from Europe, through trade with Dessalines. Some Poles had, during the Revolution, defected to General Dessalines' army, and Nugent wanted to add these troops to his force. He figured that he might be able to secure reinforcements by trading Haitians for Poles. Dessalines, in his additional trade articles, had requested the repatriation of Haitians who had been unlawfully taken from their homeland and who could now be found in Jamaica or on British ships. Nugent saw this as an opportunity to one, rid the colony of unwanted and dangerous persons, and 2, give him an opportunity to request additional personnel for his own armed forces. I beg leave further to state, Nugent wrote to Dessalines on March 8, 1804, that having agreeably to your Excellency's application, sent to St. Domingo 150 or 160 natives of that island, who had previously been confined in Jamaica at a considerable expense to the British government. And I had entertained a hope that your Excellency would have sent all the Poles to this island who had deserted from the French army. Now, there's some contradictory evidence as to whether Dessalines actually sent any Poles to Jamaica and whether Nugent, in fact, sent all of the natives of St. Domingo back to join Dessalines. Dessalines claimed that 3,000 of his men were being detained on British prison ships. And Nugent also claimed that 160 Poles who had been brought to Jamaica, quote, declined the Marine service and were most improperly brought back to Jérémie. It seems that some Poles had remained loyal to Dessalines. And in Dessalines' 1805 constitution, he granted these individuals full rights as Haitian citizens. British representatives quickly realized that they had no cards to play in order to force Dessalines to commit to their proposed treaty. On August 31, 1804, the second Earl Camden, John Jeffreys Pratt, the new Secretary of State for War in the Colonies, wrote to Nugent and proposed a revised trade agreement to submit to Dessalines. The treaty proposed by Pratt conceded to almost all Dessalines' amendments to Nugent's earlier trade proposition and argued that the British did not possess the incentives needed for such a, quote, crippling trade relationship. However, Pratt counseled that they should not, quote, not relax in the smallest degree in those articles which are to watch over and regulate Dessalines' maritime conduct. His Majesty's ministers, Pratt reported, have considered it the wisest line to resort to a policy wholly liberal as the best means of securing the friendly disposition of that island and preventing those ill consequences to Jamaica which might flow from a different temper. If the British conceded to the alterations put forth by Dessalines, Pratt strategized that they would be reluctant to encourage slave rebellion in the British West Indies. To heighten this protection, Pratt proposed that merchants in Haiti trade directly with Britain rather than through Jamaica to prevent, quote, intercourse between the black inhabitants of the two islands, as if word would not have spread by any other means. Pratt admitted that the British lacked leverage in negotiating a trade agreement, and he conceded to the independent authority held by Dessalines. If it should occur to General Dessalines, Pratt wrote in the same letter, that no mention is made in this convention of the independence of Haiti, you will acquaint him that the circumstance of treating with him is the proper acknowledgment of that independence, and that it is not usual to make a formal recognition in such cases. In an earlier letter, Pratt had explained to Nugent that formal recognition of independence was only needed in cases where the new country was a former colony of that nation. Since Haiti had never been a British colony, this formality was not standard. These instructions seem curious given scholarly emphasis on the isolation and stigmatization of the early 19th century Black Republic. And the story suggests that Haiti's post-independence experience was complicated and diverse, and that Haitian leaders sought out and found international relationships to sustain their independence. So in August of 1804, Nugent was instructed to notify Dessalines that his country's independence would be recognized by the British Empire. But we know that the British did not, in fact, formally recognize Haitian independence until 1838. So what went wrong? Nugent was convinced that internal strife in Haiti would afford them better opportunities for more favorable trade agreements. And it turned out that Nugent was right. In October of 1806, rebels vying for state power assassinated Dessalines. Haiti soon divided into North and South, led by Alexandre Pétion and Henri Christophe, respectively. However, the British still did not feel the need to establish any formal trade agreement. Nevertheless, merchants from London could be issued special licenses to trade directly with the country, avoiding contact between Haiti and Britain's Caribbean colonies. While the British did not establish any formal trade agreements with Haiti, Haiti's independence aided them in their war with France, and the migrations resulting from the new geopolitical status changed Jamaica's demographic makeup. And I'd like to conclude with a source that I found in the British National Archives that highlights the international nature of Caribbean society at this time. And it also shows the ways that colonial leaders tried to resist this fluidity. So this is a list of 33 suspicious or rather dangerous characters who have been apprehended in the city of Kingston. And this was a part of an effort to clean up the remaining mess left after the evacuation of the French from Haiti, and most of the French troops were then taken back to London or to Paris. And as you can see, the list is organized by name, color, occupation, and nationality, and then point of embarkation. The list includes French, Spanish, Curaçoan individuals, as well as one Italian, and they are labeled as white, mulatto, Sambo, black, or quadroon, and are employed as mariners, carpenters, laborers, cooks, and bakers. And my favorite example of the international nature of the Caribbean at this time is Don Pedro, who is listed as a mulatto, mariner, and French. And he appeared in Jamaica 23 days prior to this roundup and had arrived on the schooner Rosario from Puerto Rico. So here we see a mixing of French, Spanish, and British spheres. And at this point in time, this scenario was deemed dangerous in the context of Haitian independence. Thank you.